let's attempt some of the Unit 8 Day 2 homework problems. I'm going to do numbers 1, 3, 5, and 6. Each of those 4 is a little bit different, and the rest kind of mirror those 4 different problems. So in number 1, you're given a right triangle where you are told one side length is 10 units in length and one acute angle is 38 degrees. So the measure of angle A is 38 degrees. We're going to fill that in. Measure of angle C is 90 degrees. And where the 10 is positioned as the label of that side, that's side lowercase b. And that's again because it's opposite angle B. Alright, so I think the easiest thing to solve for first is the measure of angle B by just figuring out what remains because all 3 angles have to add up to 180 degrees. So 38 and angle B have to add up to 90 in order to round out that 180. So this is going to have to be 52 degrees. All right, well, since A is the one that's given to us, we're going to stick with that as our reference angle. And let's say we solve for side A first. So A is opposite, and I'm going to go with the side we were given, the 10, and that is adjacent. So based on SOHCAHTOA, if we're working with the opposite and adjacent sides, we are going to use a tangent equation here of the angle 38 degrees equals opposite over adjacent. So all we're going to have to do is just multiply both sides by 10 to get our answer for the side length of A. So let's go ahead over to Desmos and type that in. So 10 times the tangent of 38, 7.813. Actually, the directions here say nearest hundredth, now that I catch that. So 7.81 is A. 7.81. And no units are given, so we'll leave it at that. Just to double check, if you didn't get that answer, it's because your mode is probably still in radian. Okay, you'll see that's a different answer completely, so we want to go to degree mode. Go ahead and change over if you haven't on your handheld calculator as well. Alright, so now we're left with one unknown, and that's side length C. You could use Pythagorean theorem at this point, but because A is a rounded answer and you may have gotten it incorrect, I would shy away from using Pythagorean theorem and instead just set up a different trig equation. Instead of this time using A and 10, use C and 10. So C is the hypotenuse, and if we want to use the hypotenuse and the adjacent side, that's going to be cosine. So let's set up a cosine equation of 38 equals C, adjacent over hypotenuse. So this is that type of equation where we're going to have to multiply by C and then divide by the cosine of 38. So if you're comfortable enough at this point, you can go ahead and skip that intermediate step and just know that the cosine of 38 is going to wind up underneath of 10. And let's type that into our calculator. So 10 divided by the cosine 38, 12.69. And you can always double check to see if you have 3 answers here that make sense as side lengths. A squared plus B squared should end up giving you C squared in the end, according to Pythagorean theorem. You can check that on a calculator if you want to double check your answer. Okay, so let's move on to number 3. This problem is a little different because instead of me giving you an acute angle and a side length, I'm giving you 2 side lengths instead. Alright, so let's fill in what we know. Angle C is 90 degrees. Side A is 46 units. And that's actually side C, the hypotenuse, is 48 units. And if this were an assessment you would lose points if you were to put 46 for side B on accident, because side B is what we're trying to solve for. So you want to make sure you do understand how everything kind of is located and where it matches up to the lowercase letters versus the uppercase angles. All right, so maybe you solve for side B first, and to do that, you're going to use Pythagorean theorem. 46 squared plus B squared equals 48 squared. I'm going to put a calculator here. 46 squared is going to give us 2116. 48 squared, 238.4. All right, do a little subtraction. Minus 2116. B squared is 188. All right, so if you were to take the square root, you get a decimal. So that could be, since the directions do say round your answers to the nearest hundredth, that could be an acceptable answer. So let's go ahead and write that down, 13.71. But let's also practice reducing it in radical form. So that is a skill that, depending on your calculus teachers in the future, may restrict your calculator use, so you wouldn't know that decimal answer. They're going to ask you for the radical answer instead. So let's test out a few things. Is 188 divisible by, I don't know, 16? Nope. 88, is it divisible by 9? Nope. 188 divisible by 4. All right, let's go with that. So if it's divisible by 4 and leaves you with 47, which is prime, your final answer is going to be 2 root 47. Okay, so just a good thing to practice. All right, now, separately, to solve for, oops, let's undo that, to solve for one of the missing angles. Let's just go with A. I'll make that my reference angle. Put a star there, or just something to mark it. And note that 46 is opposite, 48 is the hypotenuse, and then B, the unknown, well, I guess we know it now, but I'm going to ignore that, would be your adjacent. So opposite and hypotenuse, that's going to be your sine. Put here, so the sine of A is 46 over 48. And if you recall from the notes, to get the A in the angle position by itself, you have to apply the inverse, in this case sine, because they have to match, of both sides to keep it balanced. But all that does on the left side is just cancel out the sine. So in the calculator, we're going to type in the inverse sine of 46 over 48. Inverse sine 46 over 48. 73.40. Alright, so if you trust yourself enough that you got that answer correct, all you'd have to do is subtract from 90 to find the difference. 16.6. You can double check. I think that looks okay. But if you don't trust yourself in having found the correct measure of angle A, you could always set up a different trig equation to solve for the measure of angle B separately. But you should end up with the same rounded decimal from either approach for the measure of angle B. All right, so now we're going to go on to the word problems. Do 2 of those. So number 5, we have Kimmy. She is flying a kite that has a string 40 feet long and is flying 27 feet above the ground. So let's say here's Kimmy. She's on the ground. All right. Flying a kite. And the kite string is 40 feet long. And the kite is 27 feet above the ground. Find the angle of elevation of the kite. So you can imagine, here's your right triangle. So here's your right angle. Right triangle. You can kind of connect it to where Kimmy's standing down there. And if you're looking to find the angle of elevation, you're looking for this corner here. So if that's your angle, even though it's the unknown, it's still going to be our reference angle. 27 is opposite, 40 is the hypotenuse, and it says round your answer to the nearest degree, meaning whole number. Alright, so opposite and hypotenuse is sine of the angle we're looking for. Let's call that x. Equals opposite over hypotenuse. Alright, so to solve this, we're going to have to do the inverse sine of both sides. I'm just going to write it once on the right side, because that's technically what we type into the calculator anyway. So the inverse sine of 27 over 40. Inverse sine, 27 over 40. 42.4, and if it's nearest whole number, 42. And units are degrees, because we just solved for an angle. There we go. Right, the last example we're going to do together is number 6. You have a cliff. This cliff is 80 feet above the sea. So here's your cliff. Here's the sea. We have 80 feet to the top there. From the cliff, the angle of depression to a boat is 35 degrees. So angle of depression is, if you remember, outside the triangle. So if you think of this as your right triangle, 35 degrees is also the measure of the angle of elevation in the bottom right. So here's your right angle. Trace this here. How far is the boat from the base of the cliff? So we are looking for the horizontal distance along the bottom. Round your answer to the nearest foot. Alright, so I'm going to go with the angle of elevation, 35 degrees. Cross out the depression. Alright, so in relation to that, the 80 is opposite. And what we're solving for is adjacent. Opposite and adjacent is tangent. The angle is 35 degrees. And then opposite over adjacent. Alright, so we are going to have to do 2 steps here. We're going to have to multiply by x, but then divide by the tangent of 35. And hopefully at this point you feel comfortable just skipping right to this step. So we're going to type into our calculator 80 divided by tangent 35. And get 114, and we're going to stop there to round it correctly. And the units are feet, measure of distance. There you go. Go ahead and try the rest and check back with the answer key to see how you did.